Hi everybody, I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie.
Hello.
Together we're ThinkerThemer and we review games from two different perspectives. I'm all about the mechanics, Maggie is all about the theme. Today we're making a special video about Frosthaven, which is the sequel to Gloomhaven, and it's by designer Isaac Childress and his publishing company ThinkerThemer. But we need to add a few little caveats before we get into our 5 likes and our 3 not so likes about the game.
All right, what are the caveats?
The caveats are, this is not what we do.
No, this is not our type of game, usually, at all. So this is very outside our comfort zone and very much new territory for us.
Yeah, and if you're out there and you're also a Eurogamer, for us this was our absolute entry into the Gloomhaven world universe. We have never played Gloomhaven. We have never...
I picked up Jaws of the Lion and it's still, I haven't...
We have not played Jaws of the Lion.
Get it off the shelf yet.
Yeah, so we went into this fresh. We went into the rulebook not knowing anything really about this genre of games. We don't usually play cooperative games. We don't usually play big campaign style games like this. So everything that you see in this video is from that perspective. Some of the things we're going to talk about, some people who have played Gloomhaven are going to be like, yeah, but that's the benefit of Gloomhaven. But that's our experience going in. There's going to be things that we like that are unique to Frosthaven, things that we like that are part of the Gloomhaven universe, and things that other people have already realized. That's why it's number 1 on, on BGG. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into our list, but please note that this is in no particular order. Our first like about Frosthaven.
All right, so the first thing that we enjoyed or really liked about Frosthaven is actually the story. So there's a lot of story.
There's a lot of story, but even I was enjoying the story.
There you go.
I know.
Even the non-themer was getting into it. I really appreciated, well, one, the actual writing of it, the writing style. It's it moves the story forward. It does a really good job at setting the scene, and I really appreciated like the humor, the sense of humor that they pepper through it.
Yeah, there's an undertone of humor that I really enjoy, like a bit of sarcasm and also like a bit of poking fun at the main, the character that you're playing. I really enjoyed that as well. And the written language is not so cumbersome that if you are reading it out or taking turns to read out the introduction to a scenario, it doesn't feel like, you know, too convoluted. And it all adds to what is happening around you. It really does. It's written quite well in that it creates the scene, and then I love how well that story links in with the mechanics or the setup of that particular scenario. I also particularly like linked scenarios in this game, where once you've finished one scenario, sometimes you have to start another one immediately because it's part of that same quest, if you like. So you might, with no spoilers, get to the end of a hallway, and then and you finish that scenario, but then you look right and there's this...
You have an immediate situation that needs to be addressed right now.
Something you need to do over there, or you can ignore that situation and go to that bright, shiny building over there and find out what that's all about. And as a group, you get to decide that. And the way that it unlocks different scenarios as well. So at the end of a scenario, it's going to unlock a choice sometimes, or a lot of the time, of multiple scenarios that you could go to. And there's this advent calendar style map of all this, not really a map, but like a diagram of all of the possible scenarios. So you get a sense of what you might unlock next and how that all branches out. And that means that every group is going to move through the story in a different way.
Unique. So it's going to be a completely unique experience for every single group that's playing this. I should also say the world that this is taking place is in the world of Frosthaven. It's pretty similar. It's the same universe as Gloomhaven, but Frosthaven is its own town, and we're still kind of like a band of mercenaries, for hire. And we sort of find ourselves arriving at Frosthaven with the ability to help protect or help build up and develop Frosthaven, and also, go on some quests and fight some bad guys and potentially get some coin and some good stuff and resources along the way. So so I think that choose your own adventure thing, that means that you just have, and there's so many different scenarios in here. It just gives you the sense of like, we could be playing this for months.
Yeah, but
There's
also
much
if
content.
you're replaying it with another group and you want to start from the beginning, you could choose a completely different path. So firstly, I think our number one thing is the writing tick and the story surprisingly good.
Yeah.
I thought surprisingly good, actually, for someone who's not into fantasy at all.
Yes.
So I did enjoy the building of the story. We'll come back to that a bit later in some of our other likes. But the second thing I want to talk about, and the thing that I'm most excited to talk about, is the hand management or action selection system that is core to Gloomhaven and Frosthaven. This is not going to be new news to anyone who has played Gloomhaven, but I was so pleasantly surprised by this and made me appreciate why Gloomhaven has been at number one on the BGG list. Honestly, this battle system is so clever and so satisfying. And the way that it works is every character or class has this deck of cards that you can add to as you level up your character. But I want to talk about the way this works because if you haven't played Gloomhaven, what you're going to be doing is playing 2 cards simultaneously face down out of your hand. And these 2 cards have a very interesting setup because, and I will note that between Gloomhaven and Frosthaven, there were some changes made to the iconography. I think the iconography is very clear once you get used to it.
I agree.
And it means that fewer words are required to talk about what each card does. But on the cards, you have a top section and a bottom section, and you get to choose whether you're doing the top action or the bottom action, and on the other card you have to do the reverse. So I could do the top action here and the bottom action here, and that would be my 2 actions for my turn. The other element of the card is that there is an initiative value, and that's going to dictate the turn order. And each of the villains or baddies that you are taking on in that scenario also are going to have an initiative value, and you're going to be ranking all of the characters, good and bad, in terms of who's going to go first in this round and who's, the turn order essentially. But I get to choose, for example, here I've got a 14 and a 96. Whichever card I put on top is going to be my initiative value. So if I wanted to go later in the round, I'd probably use this 96. If I wanted to go early before anyone else can attack me, hopefully knock off some of those bad guys before they get a chance to attack, I might use the 14. Now, this is really, really clever because another element of this card play is that if you run out of cards, you are going to be out of the scenario. So you only have as long as you can keep these cards in your hand. Every time you use 2 cards, they get discarded. Some of them will be permanently removed from the game if they're particularly powerful abilities. So you have to time when you want to use those powerful abilities because they're going to leave you with fewer cards to play with. In order to take the cards back out of your discard, you need to have a rest, whether that's a short rest or a long rest, to get those cards back. But when you do that, you randomly, or in a long rest you get to choose, but you have to get rid of cards out of your hand and put them in that permanent lost area. And that means that, again, if you are refreshing too often because you want that really great card back in your hand, you are going to be losing more cards. And so there's this great hand management element to this game that I was not expecting. And as a Eurogamer, I really enjoyed it.
Well, it thematically makes sense because the terminology is you're exhausted, your character is exhausted, which makes sense that a lot of the times the cards that have some really, really powerful abilities, they're some of the first ones that get lost. So if you're kind of powering through a lot of your really high power things, or you're kind of going through them really quickly, yet your character is going to be wiped out fairly quickly, and then be like, the rest of you have to battle the rest of the bad guys that are left. So I really enjoyed that because it just meant that the concept of battling bad guys on a map, nil interest, usually for me. And fantasy and monsters is nil interest. However, having this really interesting mechanic of going, oh, okay, and so often you forget that you have to do the top and the bottom of one, and you're like, oh, but I want to do 2 tops, and because usually the top ones are more about attacking, and then the bottom side are more about movement. But there's obviously some variations, and so many times you're like that becomes the tension of the decision. Not only that, when you're actually constructing that deck, you have to then balance. Okay, I need to make sure that I have a good
what's the
good harmony of things so that I'm going to be able to do lots of different things. So I really enjoy that. I want
to also talk about how the battling works. If you're not familiar with Gloomhaven, if you are, this is very similar. But for example, this guard uses the guard deck, and I really do appreciate that there are in here, also, it tells you what that enemy is going to do on its turn and the order in which it's going to do that relative to other characters. And these all have a thematic term. So this is a calculated strike versus a venom shiv. And so there are all different thematic things that they're doing. Yeah. The action really aligns with that thematic kind of name for the attack, which is like a lot of hard work because there are so many characters in this game.
So many monsters.
So many.
The process, I need to sort of do that set aside. The process of allocating and segmenting all of those monsters, that took me a couple of seasons. Yeah. Real-time seasons.
Real-time
to just organize.
But the way that this works is that depending on the level of the scenario, the bad guys are going to have more power. They're going to be able to move further. They're going to be able to attack harder. They're going to take more damage. And the way that it works as well is that you can see on the sleeve there are characters 1 to 10, so there might be up to 10 guards in the scenario. And when they take damage, you are placing damage on these different slots to show which of the guards that you're attacking. Yeah. But I really like the way this works because all of these decks are completely unique, which means that if you're fighting artillery, they're going to act in a very different way to if you're attacking a robot or if you're attacking a wolf, for example. Yeah. They all have these very thematic decks. And I just wanted to mention that. It's not my thing, but I really, really appreciate what they've done with that.
Absolutely.
All right, so the third like. The third like also relates to kind of this whole system, and that is about the way that a character is built or your class is evolving over time. And I'll link it to the battle system in saying that there is a slight amount of luck in this game. So it's not that you're rolling dice like in other battle games to work out who's going to win the battle. It really, really does come down to the clever way in which you play these cards, which I really appreciate. But then there is a modifier, an attack modifier, and that is in the form of a personal deck of cards that you have. And what I really appreciate about this is that along the way, you are going to be able to modify that deck. So you're modifying the modifier. By putting in more positive cards that are going to help you or taking out cards that are really not going to help you. For example, this -1, you might be able to get rid of that card so that you're not using a -1 on your attack when you draw from that deck. I find this really interesting because the monsters also have a modifier as well that's going to change their attack. And it does add enough of a random element to make you feel like nothing is a sure thing.
No, exactly, yeah. Because there can be complete fail in terms of an attack. And that can be very frustrating. But it can happen where you go, oh, God, such a, devastating blow. This is going to save the day. And then you get a ba-bound, like, complete.
But it works both ways. Sometimes you think you're not going to be able to take them out. And then you get a ×2 or you get a +1 or +2. And you're like, oh my goodness, I didn't know that I was going to take them out with that swing.
Or with the monsters, you're like, I'm dead as soon as they attack, and then all of a sudden they get a +1 or a -, you're like, oh, thank goodness.
Yeah, exactly.
I get to live another day.
So I feel like it adds enough fun in it to make it feel like a real battle where you're not sure of the outcome, but you can mitigate as much as possible, and you can mitigate more and more as you level up your character. And that brings me to the perks, because at the start of every scenario, you're going to be dealt 3 personal objectives. In Gloomhaven, it was 2. In Frosthaven, it's been changed to 3. And you get to choose one of those to try and achieve in this scenario. It is secret to you. And when you, if you're able to actually achieve that in the scenario, you're going to get ticks that you can apply to these, or perks, ticks that you can then translate into perks, which means that you're able to, for example, clean up that deck to make it more stacked in your favor, or to do all sorts of other things to
unlock
level
other
up.
unique abilities that maybe only your character can have. That's pretty handy.
Yeah, so that is a really fun element of the game. I really liked seeing the evolution of my character. You can also unlock, of course, higher level cards that go into your deck, which just change the way your character can operate.
It means you're really looking forward to leveling up your character. Yeah. So you're like, oh, there's some level 2, some level 3 cards in there that would be so much more powerful. Also because then your hit points grow. The higher your level, then the more kind of you can take. Yes, it's going to have an impact on the level of the monsters as well, but all in all, it's still it evolves the experience.
And there's such variety between the characters as well. And throughout, as we were playing through the scenarios, we were unlocking new classes, and that made me excited to retire my character and get a new one. And so I just really love that feeling of like there is more to explore here. It doesn't feel as rinse and repeaty if you're getting to upgrade things as you go.
That's the other thing. I won't show the front side of this, but the reason that you're almost like your character's purpose, that once it's met, that character gets to retire. It's like, I have done what was on my bucket list. And again, like that's sort of unique and out of a deck of possibilities. And it gives you an even longer term, because these battle kind of objectives, they're just per scenario essentially. But this is like, it's your whole character's goal.
But I like that in Frosthaven in particular, your character doesn't just disappear off the face of the earth. They actually settle down in Frosthaven. Once they've met their goal, they're like, you carry on with your battling without me. I'm just going to hang out here in Frosthaven, build a nice life for myself. So character development is our number 3. Our number 4 scratches a childlike wonder itch, which is the amount of surprises and boxes and
particularly
content.
For you love surprises.
I love a surprise.
You love what's behind, door A or what would we call it? Cardboard
envelopes, boxes. There's stickers.
There's so much.
All this amazing content, and I really enjoyed every time we unlocked something new. I was like, ooh, what is that? What is that? Or more items that you can craft, or whatever it might be. I did want to also talk about the passing of time in this game, because unlike Gloomhaven, in Frosthaven there is a new set of seasons, summer and winter, and you're also tracking time. So every time you finish a scenario, you are crossing off a week. Each scenario takes a week of in-game time, which, in real life, it does take many, 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 many hours to work your way through Frosthaven. But I like the sense that you also can frame where you're at in the game across a sense of, across a year. And you get to read pieces of narrative according to where you're at. So there is a sheet that tracks the time, you're crossing that off, but within each of some of those boxes, pre-printed, is some narrative. So when you reach week 4 or week 5, there might be a number on there directing you to the scenario book to read out what's happening in Frosthaven at the time. I love that. Also, as you are making your way through the story, you will be adding more numbers to that sheet. So it will say, in 4 weeks' time, add this number. And that just gives me such a sense of intrigue.
Something to look forward to. We're like,
what's going to happen there? Is that going to be good or bad? And I really liked when we got to those points and got to read something, and it's usually something that's happening in town, an opportunity to get new resources, things that are happening, but just like an event, but a time-triggered event. And I just really, it gave me a good sense of purpose.
I quite like that. And also, it's like the kind of stuff that you can get out of that, because sometimes it's like, it's fun from a narrative point of like, oh, this sort of happened, but sometimes it can actually give you really helpful stuff. So it's absolutely.
And on the element of surprise, I really like that there's some surprise minis in the box too. So, I like that they do give you the option of minis or standees along the way, but it's really cool that, all the monsters are standees, but there are some boss monsters that are going to allow you to open a box. And that's always fun as a group as well, just to be like, ooh, what are we taking on? This is new miniature.
To think a bit more real, more 3D. I mean, they're all 3D. It's like more fleshed out than a cardboard piece. And that brings us to our final number 5 thing that we liked about Frosthaven, which is the new element of the Outpost, which is this sort of what happens in between scenes, that downtime where you actually get to do some really meaningful things in the town or to the town of Frosthaven. So that will include things like getting to actually use your loot for good, for not just selfish, self-improvement reasons, but also to construct some buildings or upgrade buildings in Frosthaven, help defend Frosthaven with, some walls and stuff, preparing for potential attacks down the track.
Yeah, I really like that actually the collecting loot element in Frosthaven, and I believe it is slightly different to Gloomhaven in that you are collecting specific resources when you're out there on the field. And that means that we know that we have a building we need to build and we need wood for that building, for example. Then when you're looting, every time you defeat a monster, you're like, I didn't get wood this time. So it means that it actually gave me more of a sense of why I needed to go and pick up all of the loot along the way, because we were able to collectively combine our resources. So we had group resources as well as our own individual resources, and you were able to cross those off and both contribute to building these central buildings in Frosthaven.
It also might influence the type of scenario that you do, because actually, if we're really needing wood, this scenario is more likely to have wood.
Yeah, this is out in the forest or something, so there's going to be wood, or this one you're defeating robots, and therefore there's going to be more scrap metal lying around.
Exactly.
That's quite well thematically tied
in. Yeah, absolutely. The other thing is there's going to be, depending as you're fleshing out that map of Frosthaven, which I love because you're actually seeing it come to life with all those stickers. So there's stickers for buildings that then show not just the visually what the building is and where it is in relation to everything else, but also what different scenarios take place in different parts of the map, so you can kind of geographically locate yourself. But also there are going to be some scenarios that require particular types of gear or particular modes of transportation. They might require, for example, climbing gear, or they might require a sled, or they might require a boat, and these are all things that then you can build with all your resources during your outpost phase if you've got the right combo of things.
And that's another element that really scratched the Euro itch for me, because the sense of collecting resources to then get something built that is very familiar to us, and it did give me another sense of purpose that was bigger than the scenario we were playing. It's just like, when we get back to Frosthaven, we can build this building, and then the buildings actually trigger at the every outpost, and they give you things, or they give you the ability to translate maybe gold into resources, for example. So they're also creating this engine for you that's going to help you get other things done that you want to get done. And I do want to talk about the two different types of event, because of the summer and winter events. There are two different decks relating to those seasons. The summer ones are nicer things that are happening to you, and the winter one includes some more harsher winter style events that are happening.
Potentially some things that you're going to have to be defending against as well.
And that's just at every outpost post phase, you're going to be reading one of these cards to the group, and you get given choices, and a lot of those things are going to lead to you getting more resources and things like that. And it's a fun group decision. It works it's a fairly basic event style thing that happens, but it's fun. And along the way, you are going to face different types of events, and some of those choices you make along the way may have implications for cards that get put into the event decks as well. So I like the way that works. It just adds a little bit of fun at the end of a scenario to creating the world of Frosthaven. And that brings us to our first dislike in this game. And funnily enough, one of our favorite elements, the Outpost phase, is also one of our biggest dislikes.
Best of times, it was the worst of times.
It was the worst of times. It is really difficult to work out how you're meant to use that to your advantage, or how the outpost section really is meant to flow.
Yeah, the flow of it. It doesn't need to be this complicated, or this not complicated, because it's not that it's complicated, it's just unclear from the rule book. It is
unclear, yeah. And in the rule book, it gives you all of the steps and explains in detail what you do in each of those steps, but I didn't feel like it gave you a good overview of what you're actually trying to achieve. So it didn't say, if you build these types of buildings that are available on the map from day one, they're going to help you get resources later in the game. Or you might want to think about constructing your walls because there's going to be attacks later in the game. If you are coming into this really fresh like we were, and even people who have played Gloomhaven, because this is different and there's different events that are going to happen, you weren't having to build on this, these buildings in this map. there's no sense of like what you should actually be working at first.
Yeah.
As you go along, it becomes clearer because you realize things that you need, or you realize that, you know, some scenarios are going to have, you're going to have a boat, for example, so you better get that boat built. But it's just like, it didn't give me a strong sense of purpose to begin with. And that was frustrating because it is so rich and it adds so much narrative and a sense of purpose that it's like, why didn't they just give us, like spoon feed us a little bit in the beginning?
I almost felt like, am I missing something? Because you're reading through the rule book, and it does, the layout feels like it is everything, like everything is there. But I think the bit that's missing is like there's
the overview.
Yeah, and like how does this all come together? Because then you're like, am I allowed to do this now? It didn't actually say that I could do this now. Do I have to wait for this to happen later?
Exactly.
And so there's just so many unknowns and so many not fun unknowns that you'll get to figure out. It's just like unnecessarily like, I don't know what to do here, and this is a bit frustrating.
They could have done it a bit more hand-holding, because this is a entirely new system on top of the Gloomhaven system. And even so, for people who are playing Gloomhaven, just coming into that and being like, I feel like they set the scene for each scenario really well, but they should have set the scene for Frosthaven a bit more, and the sense of what you're trying to achieve outside of scenario.
I feel like all the elements that were Gloomhaven, similar to Gloomhaven, which is a lot of them, are very well conveyed in the book, probably in the rulebook, probably because they've had enough practice and kind of like, oh, this is the best way of conveying this information so that people get it. But I think there's a bit of a struggle with the new elements in a way that will make sense. Obviously, at the time that we're recording this, there weren't really that many
not video content.
Videos out there. But by the time this comes out, there should be, or by the time of release, there will be. And so I highly recommend that you don't try and figure it out from just the rule book. Go watch a couple of those really excellent videos. That will help you bring it all together.
Yeah, because it does add so much that I feel like, if you can highlight that for your group about like, okay, now thinking outside of the scenario, we really want to get these things done in Frosthaven, it's going to really add to the experience.
Preventing unnecessary friction.
I just wish it had been integrated a little bit better. The second thing that we did not like about our Frosthaven experience is really the excessive amount of stuff that has to fit into that box back into that box. The insert that comes with it is not great.
The pain. Not only so, it actually obviously I think it was one of those, like, the insert is there, fits it sort of fits a purpose, but it's such a flimsy plastic as well that ours came ripped already, like even in the box. So it is something and big frustration when you punch everything out and you put things in place, it doesn't really fit back together all that well without it having like major lid lift. But also all the monsters, it's awesome there's so many monsters, but they all just go into their own individual baggie and there's no space for them. So it's quite literally like they have what should have been the really satisfying, oh yeah, this is where everything kind of goes together, and you're like, oh yeah, this fits and this fits, and then it's like, just throw the monsters on top. I'm like, there's a tower of monsters that is like twice the size of this thing. How is this going to... And so then you just end up with this very, very, frustrating.
It is super frustrating, and it really does slow down the setup, and there is a lot of setup. So
you end up with piles of things all over the room. Yes. Not ideal.
Yeah.
So it definitely needs a good insert.
An insert, and both Laser Rocks and Folded Space have kindly offered to send us inserts, so we'll be checking those out. They have not arrived in time for this recording, but certainly an insert is something that we're really going to appreciate about this game. So that is our second dislike. And our final dislike is about the style of game itself. And I'm so sorry for those who like this style of game. The main issue we have with this style of game is the element of having no fail forward. Yes. So when you fail a scenario, just like in Gloomhaven, you are meant to, you should do the scenario again and try and successfully beat the scenario. If you're someone who just wants to experience new, get through...
Like, just get through the story.
There's so many scenarios to experience. And, if you don't have a lot of time, or you're not willing to put a couple of years into playing one game, you might want to just move forward. Maybe you get less stuff, but you get to move forward. In this game, you do need to repeat it. And for us and our gaming preferences, for us and our general distaste for the battling and wanting to get to that outpost phase more frequently, or like just progress in the story or find out a new event, having to play a scenario again was really frustrating for us. And that's the main thing I think that detracted away from the game for me. It was just like the thought of doing a scenario again was just like, oh no.
Also because that, like, the setup of every scenario, like, it's quite considerable in terms of, like, okay, you need to pull out the right, bad guys, and you need to pull out find the right tiles, because there's a lot of different map tiles, which is excellent in terms of, like, the variability that you're going to have of your maps. But, for each scenario, it's like there's a lot. And once you've, also, the way that this plays out is as you kind of start with one room, and that's the room that you're usually in, and you can see what bad guys are there. There's an element of surprise, as usually when you go through a door and you open another room, as you unlock that door, or whatever kind of bridging thing that's going to take you into the next room, there'll be a bit of story, and then that's going to have a second kind of stage of setup where you now get to reveal, what bad guys are in that room and what configuration and what obstacles and what. And so even though you may have all those things on the table and you're like, okay, well, let's replay the campaign, the element of surprise is now gone.
Yes.
So I guess from trying to figure out, let me beat it. Yes, you kind of now have a bit more information, but it's like, for me, the enjoyment is in that discovery. And it's like, to replay it again and to reset everything again, no.
And as you get further along in the campaign, the scenarios get more and more complex, and they go on for longer and longer. Yes. Like, especially when you get to level 3 style scenarios, there is a lot of elements, a lot of setup. There's a lot of flicking through different parts of the narrative in the book, and so you end up reading like 6 or 7 different passages. The thought of going back and doing that again, really painful.
Sense of dread.
But that is part and parcel of this genre of games. Some people will really like just working with their group of friends until they can complete a scenario together. So I appreciate that that's just something very personal to us. And so that's our 5 likes and our 3 dislikes, but let's now talk about how we overall felt about the game.
Okay, I should caveat this with the fact that this is still, even though we've actually played quite a lot of this now, it's still technically our first impressions, because there's still so much more of this world that we haven't discovered and uncovered. But sort of so far, and the other thing that I'll say a caveat is, we are approaching it from we're Eurogamers
and new to the whole world,
new to the universe of Gloomhaven, Frosthaven. Yes. Also, I personally we are not fantasy sort of world type people, and not like monster battling type.
There's a lot of caveats.
There's a lot of caveats there. So what I'll say is there was I enjoyed my time with the discovery of this a lot more than I anticipated, and I think it's probably a similar experience for you, because I didn't anticipate that I would actually, even though I tend to not enjoy battling for the sake of battling, that deck, that hand management system was interesting and engaging enough. That meant that I'm like, oh yeah, okay, how am I going to, like, it's stimulating enough that I'm trying to figure out the combo of things, and I'm kind of going through it too quickly, or if I use this now, if I use this for the top ability, I won't get to use the bottom ability of that card, which I really want. So that element I found really interesting. I think,
or that moment where you're about to run out of cards and you realize,
and you're like, I've got 2 turns left.
I actually have 2 turns left, and then I'm out of cards, so we need to like kill those last remaining monsters and get out of here, or else we're in trouble. I really liked that too. That was by far my favorite element of the game, that hand management, the character system, the way that deck works, your own personal modifier, just everything about the character and your action selection, the initiative. So smart. And I understand now why the people who put this at the top of their list, I understand.
Makes sense.
Now
like
why.
If I love this world of like the fantasy world and battling
we'd
monsters,
be all in on this. We'd play it out
Amy,
over and over.
You wouldn't see me ever again. I would just be playing this all day, every day. But it isn't. So that's why there was that caveat. Like, we're not usually into this as a genre. So I think for me, then the challenge was, after we got through several scenarios, and again, when faced with the concept of, we have to replay a scenario, because now the element of discovery was sort of gone, now was just the mechanics of battling bad guys, that started to wear a bit, like get a bit old for me, or a bit repetitive, a bit repetitive.
It did start to feel a bit repetitive for me as well, because I'm not someone who's really interested in, this new type of monster like that we haven't faced before. I appreciated that.
Another bad guy.
It was different mechanically. I really appreciate that about the game. If you're into that kind of lore, I could totally appreciate why you'd love that. But for me, it was just like, not that exciting. It was just another thing to get past in order to get back to Frosthaven. So I will say that I actually enjoyed this game far more than I thought I would. Like, far more. And I think that is really a testament to its design. I really enjoyed the story elements. I laughed more than once at the story.
Out loud. You LOL'd.
I did. I thought it was very clever. And that element of, I think that if it was Gloomhaven, I would have tired of it much quicker, because the reason why I want to keep playing this game is to build on the world of Frosthaven. I want to see what happens when I get further along in that timeline, when I've built more buildings, when I've built up that world, when I've crafted more things for my character. I feel like there's a sense of momentum in having that Outpost outside world that I would not have felt with Gloomhaven, because they didn't have that element. It would have just felt like battle. And so from a Eurogamer perspective, that is one element that I feel like really does help, but it needs better explanation. So that is how I'm feeling at the point where we're at. I feel like I've enjoyed it much more than I thought I would. If you wanted to keep playing it, or there's other friends in our life that want to keep playing it, I will happily keep playing this, because I'm enjoying, I'm actually enjoying the experience.
And it's like, it's that thing of like, as we sit down and to play it, there's the little, like the setup takes a little while, and I don't know how much of that might be helped with with inserts, because it means that it's just faster. But then once we're actually playing it and we're uncovering that story, that, like, I always had a really great time.
Yeah, I do also want to mention, because we didn't talk about it, there's an element of potions or alchemy that comes into the game as well.
You're revealing them as well, so you don't actually know at the start, what mixes are going to create.
Yeah, and you're collecting special herb resources that can create these potions.
Roots and things.
Yeah, I felt like that wasn't as exciting for me, because the potions are one-off use cards, and they're not super powerful without going into too much detail. They're not like game changing, and they weren't as exciting as, say, getting a new card for my character deck, which was way more interesting to me mechanically. So that wasn't my favorite element of the Outpost. I much preferred the buildings, upgrading those buildings as well, and then taking joy in the fact that they were then producing things for you and helping you move forward. Oh, and I did want to talk about one last thing, inspiration. So there is this new, I believe this is new, kind of resource that you collect called inspiration, and you collect it as a group, and you can get bonuses along the way, but generally speaking, it's 4 inspiration minus the number of characters that played in that scenario. So in a 2-player, you would always get 2 inspiration at the end of the scenario, and that acts as a wild resource. And that is important, because it means that in a 2-player experience, if you're playing this just through with one other person, then you're getting more resources, which means you get the opportunity to unlock more stuff, as if you were playing in a 4-player game where there were more people defeating more monsters and getting more loot, which means that you're going to be able to see more of the stuff in the box. And I think that is just a really simple, really clever way to make a 2-player experience feel a bit closer to a 3 or 4-player experience. So that was a lot of content, but that was our first impressions of Frosthaven with where we're at so far. We're hoping to play more of it at some point and give you an updated review. But for now, we hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to the channel if you are interested in big box board game reviews, and we'll be back with more content soon. But otherwise, bye for now. Bye.